In the small town of Millhaven, nestled deep in the woods of Maine, there was a house that no one talked about but everyone knew. It wasn't haunted in the way you'd think, a spectral figure passing by the window or bloodstains that appeared on the walls. No, the problem with the house on Millwood Lane was far subtler and far more insidious. They called it the Hollow House. The structure itself was unremarkable. A two-story colonial with peeling white paint, sagging gutters, and a front door that leaned slightly off its hinges. It had stood empty for nearly 30 years, and though many people had considered buying it over the years, something always stopped them. Realtors avoided showing it. Construction crews who came to repair it often left after a day or two, muttering about bad vibes and headaches. The town's children dared each other to touch the doorknob or peek inside, but even the bravest ones rarely crossed the threshold. That was until Jim Crawford came to town. Jim was a drifter. He'd spent most of his life moving from one odd job to another, never staying anywhere long enough to grow roots. At 42, he was tired of cheap motels, greasy diner food, and his own endless sense of failure. Millhaven was supposed to be his fresh start. A quiet place to get his bearings. And when he saw the Hollow House listed for a price so low it was practically free, he didn't think twice. He bought it on the spot. The first few days in the house were uneventful. Jim patched up some broken windows, mowed the overgrown lawn, and even managed to fix the crooked front door. The interior was musty and smelled faintly of mildew, but he cleaned it as best he could. The place felt lonely, sure, but so did he. He told himself they were a good match. It wasn't until the fifth night that things began to change. Jim had set up his bedroll in the living room, as the bedrooms upstairs felt too big and cold. He was drifting off when he heard a faint noise, like a whisper, but not quite. It was more of a rustling, as if someone was shuffling papers in the next room. He sat up, heart pounding. "Hello?" he called, his voice cracking. The sound stopped. Jim told himself it was nothing. Old houses made noises, didn't they? He settled back down, but sleep didn't come easy. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt the weight of the house pressing down on him, as if it were watching. The next morning, he found something strange in the kitchen. On the table, which he hadn't touched since moving in, was a single playing card, the Queen of Hearts. It lay there like a silent accusation. Jim laughed nervously and swept the card into the trash. "Kids," he muttered, though he knew no one had been in the house. The doors were locked. The windows sealed. By the end of the week, the whispers had grown louder. Jim tried to ignore them, but they were persistent, following him from room to room. Sometimes they sounded like a woman's voice, soft and pleading. Other times, they were guttural and angry, words he couldn't understand but that made his skin crawl. One night, unable to take it anymore, Jim shouted into the darkness, "What do you want from me?" The house went silent. For a moment, he thought he'd scared it off. Then, from upstairs, came a single loud thud. It sounded like something heavy falling to the floor. Jim froze. He hadn't been upstairs since he moved in. His pulse thundered in his ears as he grabbed a flashlight and slowly climbed the creaking staircase. The air grew colder with every step, and by the time he reached the second floor, he could see his breath fogging in front of him. The door to the master bedroom was ajar. He pushed it open. The room was empty, except for the bed. On the mattress, laid out neatly, were dozens of playing cards. They formed a pattern, a perfect circle, with the Queen of Hearts in the center. Jim backed out of the room, slamming the door shut. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, he called a local historian, a woman named Claire Sims, to ask about the house's history. At first, she was reluctant to talk, but Jim's desperation must have won her over. "It's just an old story," she said hesitantly. "Probably nothing. Try me." Claire sighed. In the 1940s, a man named Thomas Brill lived there with his wife, Eleanor. They were troubled. Thomas was a gambler, and not a very good one. He lost their savings, their home, everything. They moved into that house as a last resort. One night, in a fit of rage, Thomas killed Eleanor. The neighbors heard her screaming, but no one came to help. Jim swallowed hard. What happened to him? He disappeared. Some say he hung himself in the house, but no one ever found the body. After the call, Jim felt a chill he couldn't shake. That night, he locked every door and window, but it didn't matter. The house was alive now, and it wanted him to know it. The final night began like the others, with whispers. But this time, they didn't stay faint. They grew louder and louder until they were screams, echoing through the halls. Jim covered his ears, but he couldn't block them out. He stumbled upstairs, drawn by a force he couldn't resist. The master bedroom door was open again, and the playing cards were back, this time forming a new shape, an arrow, pointing toward the closet. "Please," Jim whispered. "I don't want to." But the screams wouldn't stop. Trembling, he opened the closet door. Inside, hanging from a noose, was a skeletal figure in a rotted suit. Its empty eye sockets seemed to stare straight at him. Clutched in its bony hand was a queen of hearts. Jim screamed and ran from the house, never looking back. The hollow house still stands in Millhaven, waiting for its next occupant. The playing cards remain scattered throughout the master bedroom, and if you listen closely, you can still hear the whispers. Some houses don't want to be lived in. Some houses just want to be left alone.